Hello, I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is an opportunity for us to visit with people from the greater Plymouth area, and today I'm delighted to have as our guests Dr. Barry Potvin. He is the chair of the Board of Health at the town of Plymouth, and also a student member of the Board of Health, Erin Hayes. And we're going to begin with Barry. Barry, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
So Barry, for those people that may not know you, and you and I spent a lot of time during the COVID period here, midday at what was then PEC TV, giving updates, but it's been several years since then. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm originally from Methuen, Massachusetts. I went to college at Brandeis University and graduate school down at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and then did some postdoctoral work up in New York City at Columbia Medical School, and also at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Retired after 36 years of actually teaching at the undergraduate college associated with Einstein's Medical School. And once I retired, I had promised my family that I don't know where or how, but I know I'm coming home to Massachusetts, and it's going to happen. And all my relatives said, "Yeah, you're serious, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I'm serious." Mm-hmm. And so the year that my wife and I both retired at the same time, we moved back to Massachusetts. My background is I have a doctoral degree in genetics. And when I was teaching epidemiology and public health and microbiology and biochemistry and genetics. So I was a busy guy. I was also the pre-medical, pre-health advisor for about 5 years. So that's where I come from.
And so Dr. Potvin, how was it that when you came to Plymouth that you ended up being involved in the Board of Health?
Well, at the time I was looking for something to do in retirement, and I wanted to make sure I used all my years of experience and knowledge to do something worthwhile. So I asked around, and I was referred to the then department head at the public health department, and went in to talk to him, and he, within about 5 minutes, said, "You have to join the Board of Health." I said, "Have to?" He said, "Yes, you have to." So I said, "Fine." And he said, "Besides that, I think we should make you the chair." I said, "You just met me like 5 minutes ago." And he said, "Well, your background is something that, is very valuable here." I said, "Well, I'm not really that comfortable becoming the chair with no experience whatever in doing this kind of thing. Maybe later on." So I eventually became the vice chair for, I guess, the first year or so. And then because the members of the Board of Health kind of rotate every 3 years with reappointments, the person who was then chair left. And then since then, I've been the chair and been reappointed twice.
And what was your first year in the Board of Health?
It would have been 2017.
So historically, since I've been serving as a town official since the 80s, the Board of Health didn't have a lot of visibility in the town until you came on the board, and then all of a sudden, you guys were leading the news locally often when we had COVID. Tell us about that.
Well, when I first arrived and I started attending actually Board of Health meetings before I was even on the Board of Health, it was kind of lonely sitting in the audience as the only one, but I did it anyway. They were mostly talking about things like septic systems. Once there was someone who came in and wanted a variance so she could have a rooster at home. But it was pretty routine sort of matters, and it wasn't terribly exciting.
That's it.
And I developed all kinds of thoughts and ideas and, initiatives that I thought would be valuable, and talked to, the head of the department about it. And generally speaking, I didn't receive an awful lot of enthusiastic support in my ideas. But then, the head of the department changed, and now it was Karen Keene. And all of a sudden, I realized there's a lot of other things, especially during the pandemic, that the people in Plymouth need to know about, which they probably don't. So we started putting in all kinds of things, that involved a lot of different infectious diseases and chronic diseases. And the latest things that we were pulling off the internet from the CDC Center for Disease Control and from the State Department of Public Health. And I was in conversation with the State Department of Public Health a lot, and eventually realized that they were developing a new grant program, which is called the Public Health Grant for Services. And it was too late to apply for that for the town of Plymouth the first year because the deadline was gone. But they did several more rounds of applications, and I jumped on it.
Good.
And eventually, Plymouth was awarded a Public Health Excellence Grant. It's about $500,000 a year in support from the state now. And we work with 5 other towns in the area.
Terrific. So bring us now to the student program with the Board of Health. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one of the bright ideas I had, which I didn't get a lot of enthusiasm for initially, was, I was a college professor for 36 years. I sort of have a positive feeling about working with, high school and college students. And I really think that we owe it to that generation to make sure that they know what it is we do, how we do it, and how the local government works. And so I called the high school, actually worked with the superintendent and the head of nursing, and I referred to the principals at both high schools and said, this is, what we'd like to do. Can you find us someone? And it didn't take long. And that was more than several years, probably about 4 years ago now when that started. And so they were coming, they were mostly doing Zoom because we were still in the pandemic era. As of last year, our student representative from Plymouth South started attending all of our meetings, and I mean all of them, in person. And she integrated very well into the membership of the Board of Health. She couldn't vote, obviously. But whenever something came up that we thought involved the high school generation, it was really invaluable having her there to get the perspective of students at that stage of their education. And then ultimately, with last year's ambassador, which is what they called her at Plymouth South, she went on and went to college, and she's now actually majoring in biomedical sciences. And she also just told me, because we're still in touch, that she's decided to also dual major with public health.
Great. And so, current member, how did that come about?
Well, we developed this relationship with the school principals, and every year in the fall, say, okay, well, that one just graduated, and she was great. Can you find us another one? Mm-hmm. And sure enough, at least at Plymouth South, immediately, I guess they go to the teacher of the biomedical sciences program at the school. And Lauren had already been discussing a lot of things in the class about what was going on and what we did and how we did it. And within a day, I got Erin's name back, and I was reassured by the school principal that she is fantastic. She's going to be just like Lauren was, if not even better. It's like, wow.
Great. Well, Erin, that's your introduction. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Erin Hayes. So, Erin, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been living in Plymouth now probably like 14 years. I moved here when I was 3. I lived in Weymouth before. I'm a senior at Plymouth South High School, and I'm part of the biomedical sciences program. Outside of school, I'm president of Medical Careers Club. I like to stay active in the community. I've been doing orchestra now for 8 years, which is weird to say out loud.
What do you play?
Violin.
Violin, nice.
I like to stay active in the school community and part of National Honor Society, Music and National Honor Society.
So, Erin, when you graduate this year, what are your plans?
I plan to go to college. I would love to stay local. I hopefully will be majoring in nursing on a pre-PA track.
Okay. And Erin, tell us a little bit about your involvement in the Board of Health in Plymouth. How'd that come about from your point of view?
So late September, I was called down to the principal's office, and I was told that from the 2 biomed teachers at South that I was recommended to be a member on the Board of Health. And immediately I was like, I definitely should take this. I actually had heard Lauren talk about it a lot, about her experience, because she was in medical careers too. And she loved the experience. She loved getting the involvement in the community, but she liked hearing what was going on too. So I really wanted to get involved.
Good. And you've attended some Board of Health meetings?
Yes, I've attended 2 at this point.
Okay. And what do you think?
I love it. I think it's really interesting seeing the community. I never knew the different types of things that people need to get like grants for and all this other stuff. So it's really interesting seeing people from the community and like hearing the discussions and how it's going to affect not just the different businesses necessarily, but the whole community. So it's been really eye-opening for me.
And Dr. Potvin mentioned about how in certain issues that the perspective from a young person in high school has been invaluable. So do you agree with that?
I think so, yeah. I actually think that kids, they offer a lot of different insight. Even as young as like kindergarten, I'm a teacher at my church, and just hearing their perspectives too, it's so interesting to hear how like different things are seen differently in different like generations necessarily. So I think it's valuable having a high schooler, because not necessarily everything that's seen from adults is seen by kids.
Are there any health issues that are particularly of interest to you or on your radar? Is like something like, I really care about this?
I think the biggest thing has to be the smoking and the vaping. It's big at the schools, and the school has been great trying to stop it, but it's hard. You have kids, they sneak into the bathroom whenever they can. I know me personally, I might wait like 5 minutes in a line trying to get into a stall when kids are just vaping, blocking sinks. It's a huge inconvenience. And then also the kids like that don't necessarily smoke, they get kind of the side effects from it. They smell it in the bathroom. I know sometimes if they're smoking pot, I leave the bathroom with a headache, and then I have a headache for the rest of the day. So that's probably the biggest concern for me.
My father, many years ago, developed asthma as a result of his job, and it worked into chronic asthma, and then unfortunately he died at a young age of emphysema. Never smoked a day in his life, but that was at a time when people really didn't fully appreciate the effects of secondhand smoke or third-hand smoke. And I guess my question to you would be, do you think that your fellow students who are smoking or vaping or smoking marijuana, do you think they have an awareness as to the second or third hand effect of the smoking?
I would like to say yes, because I feel like a lot of times, especially in health classes in high school, we get that sort of awareness. It's covered in class, but at the same time, it's who's really paying attention. So I would want to say yes, but I really don't think so.
Well, thank you. We're going to come back to you in a minute. Dr. Potvin, you just heard what she said about the fact that there's smoking in the school buildings, and there shouldn't be. Now, I remember in the 80s when I was chair of the school committee, and there wasn't a state law, we still voted on the school committee to not have smoking in the buildings. And of course, now there's state law, kind of be on school grounds. Any thoughts about what can be done to address that?
Well, education is probably primary. One of the things that we did bring up, because we're always looking at the information that's coming out at the state and the federal level, is that in addition to e-cigarettes, some students have now utilized these little pouches that they can put under their tongues that are loaded with nicotine. And there's no way to know if anybody's using that. And there's also been a development with toothpicks that have nicotine actually added to them. And so, what we're really worried about for the students is nicotine addiction. It's a major health problem, and once someone's addicted to nicotine, it's probably a risk factor for becoming addicted to other things as well. And it has certainly deleterious effects upon the students' ability to perform and learn in schools. So we have been fighting that ever since I've been on the Board of Health. And we're very aware of it. So we will bring it up, and we do bring it up. And we also, either myself or Dr. Reed, who's the MD, who's also on the Board of Health with us, go to the school wellness meetings, which are quarterly. And so we have a lot of input into what's going on among the nurses in all the schools. And that is a frequent topic of discussion.
Have you ever met jointly with the school committee?
Yes, but it was really part of the pandemic problem because I was asked to come and make recommendations or at least answer questions for the school committee about COVID-19 and how it is spread and what can be done to reduce the risks from it.
Good. So speaking of that time again with the COVID pandemic, when you and I spent quite a bit of time together trying to guide in the town as they navigated the health concerns. At the time, I recall that you would report almost daily what was coming down at the state level and what was coming down at the federal level. And I now have been hearing from people concerns about the new administration at the federal level and some of the changes that might be put into effect that relate to health care.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, could you explain to our viewers where the Plymouth Board of Health fits in the hierarchy between state guidelines, federal guidelines?
Sure. I mean, I learned this pretty quickly because obviously when I first arrived, I didn't know that much about how that actually was arranged. But I found out fairly rapidly that boards of health are unique in local government in that they have a lot of autonomy. And the autonomy is such that what the Board of Health decides to do generally can't even be overturned by other local political groups, including the town manager and the select board. So the reason for that, of course, is that the Board of Health and our Department of Public Health under Karen Keene have to be able to respond quickly because these things happen with little warning. And when something like that happens, you have to really rely upon people that have in-depth knowledge and experience and know how to do things to correct or mitigate whatever the health issue is. The state obviously is the source of a lot of information for us, and they actually, through that Public Health Excellence Grant, dictate to us in some ways about what our priorities should be in terms of how we serve the local communities that we work with. And one of the things that they mentioned right away, because they evaluated what we were already doing and what they wanted us to be doing and doing better, one of the ones that was actually tobacco controls, especially for sales to underage buyers. And so among our 6 towns, that really wasn't being done very well. So now, using some of the grant funding, we have twice-a-year inspections of all sales locations, and it's done by a group that actually works out of Cape Cod, and they bring in an underage buyer who goes into the stores and attempts to buy things, of course, illegally, and if they sell it to them, they actually are cited for it, and if they're cited for it the first time, there's state, and second and third times, there are state-mandated fines. We can't change them. That's new. Didn't used to be like that. So the first violation is a $1,000 fine. The second violation is a $2,000 fine. The third violation is a $5,000 fine. And if they are unfortunate enough to not learn their lessons in time, the fourth violation, they lose their tobacco sales permit. Mm-hmm. And all that is done by the Board of Health.
Nice.
So we worked on that. The state is happy with us. They also said you need to pay more attention to infectious disease control. So we hired an epidemiologist using the grant funds. And we now have somebody for each of the towns that actually looks at the state data that's flowing in about what infectious diseases are current, what cases have happened in the last 24 hours. It's a daily chore. And if we find something that's kind of risky and serious, we are empowered to try to do something to mitigate it, control its spread.
And you mentioned Dr. Reed, and you've got how many people on the board?
5.
And
1 alternate.
And tell us a little bit about the other members in addition to you.
Well, Dr. Reed is a pediatrician. She has an MD degree. She also has association with one of the one of the local organizations that serves the homeless population. There are 2 people on the board, aside from myself and Dr. Reed, that now have masters in public health.
Wow, wonderful.
One of them's Lorenzo, and the other one is Amy Palmer.
Great.
And so that's about 4 of us. And the other person recently joined. I think she, if I recall correctly, she has a nursing and health administration background. So we have quite a board of health.
We're very fortunate to have 5 people with a medical background.
Yes, we are. And as a matter of fact, the head nurse at the school system, in talking to other school systems, said you wouldn't believe what goes on in Plymouth, and our board of health will knock your socks off.
That's terrific. So, speaking of the school nurse, bringing us back to the schools. So, Erin Hayes, you heard a little bit about what Dr. Potvin said about the people on the board. You've worked with Dr. Potvin. Do they have anything to teach you?
I'm sure they do. Just talking to Dr. Reed alone, she's given me so much advice already about just the college path, what I should be taking based off of like what I want to do. She's like, if you want to be a doctor, just go for it. Which honestly, the advice has been so great. I haven't been to a lot of meetings, like I said, but everyone just seems so like intelligent and full of knowledge, and I'm really looking forward.
So, we heard about the issue at the school with the smoking, and you've been bringing it to the bathroom. What would be another health issue, in addition to smoking, that you think concerns people your age?
It kind of goes hand in hand with the smoking, I find, with a lot of kids, but alcohol and drinking. A lot of kids, they don't necessarily get it themselves. They get it from older siblings, or some parents may provide it, but it seems to be the older sibling usually provides alcohol, but it's been affecting a lot of kids. I've noticed just in my grade alone, a lot of kids that had a lot of promise. They were very smart, very just mature for their age, kind of almost fallen back a bit. And I think a lot of that has to do with drinking, going home, partying.
So it is a problem.
I'd say so. Not necessarily in the school, but it definitely is seen in the school environment when kids come back to school after like breaks with parties and they come back. No one's necessarily focused anymore. There's like a lack of attention.
Is there anything offered at the school to support students that might be concerned about drinking or drunk driving?
We actually have a Students Against Dangerous Decisions Club, which I'm a part of. We like to put on school events every year. We have a mock crash, and it's exactly what it is. It's a mock crash for the senior class, where it's usually right before seniors leave, and it's a scene where the students, they mock like as if they were going to a party, and somebody who had been under the influence decides to drive themselves and all their friends back home from the party, and the car crashes, and it shows the devastating effects of what driving under the influence can do. And I think it's moving for a lot of the kids, because not only do they see the effects, but they see people that they know have grown up with have those effects on them, whether it's fatal injuries. Some of them, it's gory. So some of the kids, they do die, but it's moving. I've watched it just from like a window from school, and it's really impactful.
And you mentioned the name of the group, because I knew there used to be a group called Students Against Drunk Driving. So what's the name of the group now?
Students Against Dangerous Decisions. Okay. So it's basically the same idea, except now it's taking into account like tobacco use, nicotine addiction, vaping, smoking, just a more general idea. So that way it's not just necessarily focusing on drunk driving and drinking, but the whole idea of substance use.
So if someone watching this, a student or a parent, I had a question for you. Is there a way in which they can email you? Would it be through the Board of Health, or do you have an email where you could receive a question?
I mean, I have my personal email, which I'd always be willing to answer questions for parents. Do you want me to say it, or?
Well, that's up to you, but they could also, I'll come back to Dr. Butt, but I assume they could contact the Board of Health.
Yeah, for sure.
You'd be happy to answer questions.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Dr. Potvin, how would they reach Erin through the Board of Health?
Pretty simple.
Okay.
All they have to do is send me an email at my Plymouth email address.
What's that?
Potvin@plymouth-ma.gov.
Okay.
And if it refers to anything involving the students at the schools, I would immediately not only forward that to our department head, Karen Keene, and probably to our physician, Dr. Reed, but also to Aaron in this case.
Good. So if people had general questions for you, but also maybe for the Board of Health, do you know how they would contact the Board of Health?
Well, again, it can be done through email. Sometimes people will actually, we don't have a town phone number, nor do we have a town office
Okay.
for the Board of Health. The Public Health Department does have an office and does have a phone system. And so I frequently get forwarded voicemails from the office that was sent in to the department office. That happens frequently. Sometimes they just send me a message that I didn't see yet from someone that says, can the Board of Health provide answers to this? And I see it, and if there's a phone number, I return the call. So there's ways to do it. I mean, it's not an ideal situation, but you have to understand that in Plymouth and many other towns, the Board of Health is made up of 5 totally uncompensated volunteers. To the point where there is nothing. There's no phone numbers. There's no office. It's kind of awkward at times to reach the Board of Health because we don't have a physical location where people can reach us.
All right. So, do we know how to reach the Board of Health office at Town Hall?
Well, it's the Department of Public Health.
Okay.
The Board of Health is a separate entity.
Okay.
One of the things that I changed as soon as I became the chairperson, because I saw it as a problem, was that I didn't think there was enough interaction and cooperation going on, believe it or not, between the Board of Health and the Department of Public Health. So I said, this has got to change. And so it did. And Karen Keene and her office staff and I and the Board of Health now interact very, very closely with the department staff. And we do a lot of things in cooperation. We discuss what can we do about this, what should we put on the agenda. So we're a team. And now Laura was a member of the team, and now it's Aaron.
That's good. So do you set up the agenda for the Board of Health meetings?
I do that on usually the Thursday before the scheduled meeting because we have to post it 48 hours before the meeting according to open meeting law. But I do it in direct consultation via Zoom, of course, with Karen Keene, and as often as possible with Dr. Reed.
And tell us, what's a typical agenda of the Board of Health, if there is a typical?
Well, the typical agenda is that we have an awful lot of septic engineers that need variances from various rules and regulations that apply to the septic systems, simply because here in Plymouth, the lots are usually quite small, and if they were to follow all the setback requirements and other requirements for the septic system installation, it'd be impossible. So within the realm of what we can do on a local basis, because we have our own set of regulations, and what is a little less strict that's done on a state level, it's usually us. But if it got to the point where something had to be done that would violate a state regulation, they would have to go to the state DPH to do it. Other things come across our desks all the time. We have rules to control fats, oils, and greases going down the drains into the septic system, which can clog up. We have rules and regulations about grease traps because of that, that all the restaurants have to deal with. We have other rules and regulations that pertain to a whole variety of things. The latest, I guess, was rodent control, because we had a problem with rat infestations, which is a problem not only here in Plymouth, but everywhere, especially in the cities. But there was no rodent control guidelines. And so we put those together using rodent control guidelines that other towns and cities had put in place. We had a public forum. And so a bunch of environmental group representatives came in, and people from pest control companies came in, and they made, comments and suggestions. And then it was my job as the chair to put all those comments and suggestions together and incorporate as much as I could into our own regulations before we passed it. And I think we passed it as a policy.
Good.
So far, we've gotten requests for that from several other towns. We also do short-term rental regulations, and we've gotten, actually, I think Karen Keene actually gave a presentation about that at the latest Massachusetts Health Officers Association meeting, and that came from us, and now it's going statewide.
That's a real compliment to Plymouth to be leading in Board of Health. I think because of our size and the talent in the community, we see that a lot. I know in my area as town meeting, we've been a leader in terms of moving forward with procedures that maybe a lot of other towns are kind of behind and looking to move forward.
Well, there is generally some resistance from some groups within the town when you do these kind of things. And so my philosophy has always been, if there's differing opinions, I want to hear them.
Sure.
I want them to be listened to by the entire Board of Health. I want them to be discussed. And then I want to try to find common middle ground and reach an agreement. And that was especially true with the short-term rental regulation problem, which went on for about 2 years. And a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions. And we finally came up with something that everybody agreed with and has been working out extremely well for the town of Plymouth.
Good.
So I also wanted to mention that there are things coming up that involve the schools and the students at schools that probably even Erin doesn't know a lot about yet. But going back to Lauren, who is Erin's predecessor, she mentioned at one point that it was really, really scary at the time when school let out, because everyone left at the same time, and many of them had cars, and it was like an accident waiting to happen. And everybody was going every which way, and it was really, really difficult because so many people were leaving at the same time. And so the first thing we did was say, okay, we need to get this back to the school officials, and maybe they can sort of stagger it a little bit to reduce the risks. So that's obviously happening. As of this morning, I heard that there was an issue going on with bullying on school buses. And so you don't know that yet, Erin. But I mentioned to when you first came in today, and that actually contributes to absenteeism in the schools. Because if students are bullied, they're going to be very reluctant to get back on the school buses often and be subjected to it again. So I think it's a major problem. It's not just Plymouth.
No.
I mean, I'm sure that happens everywhere. But, you know, we're a bunch of activists, and if we see a problem, we are going to try to find a way to mitigate it a little bit.
Well, Erin, I think he's thrown the ball to you. So, I mean, I can see why bullying would be a health issue, because people's mental health, not to mention physical harm that can occur. So have you ever been aware that there might be some bullying going on in the school?
Trying to think. Honestly, I've never seen it firsthand, especially at the high school. I honestly give the high school a lot of credit. I think as a whole, we're a very accepting community. I think we're very inclusive. With the Strive program alone, I think we do a lot to make sure.
What's that?
The Strive program. It's the special education students. We do a lot with them. We want to make everyone feel a part of the community. We have unified basketball, unified track, just to make them feel incorporated into the community. Every single year, it's probably one of the best school traditions we have. It's usually like mid-October. There's something called the Mega Bowl, and it's the two unified basketball teams in the high schools, and the whole district gets together. It's usually at South, and everyone just cheers on both teams, and it's such a great kind of like community building event. But bullying, I could probably see it in the younger grades. I know when I was little, there was definitely bullying going on, just like older kids picking on the younger kids, but I've never seen it personally.
What about the driving you mentioned at the end of school?
The driving I see every day. The driving's tough because I don't know about North, but at South, we have the buses are in the front. Then the juniors that drive, they park towards our football stadium.
Okay.
And then the seniors park in the back. So the seniors try to get out before the buses block us off, which causes a lot of dangerous driving, to say the least. I've had multiple times where I'm trying to back out of a spot, and I've had someone try to get by me going probably like 30 miles an hour where they should probably going around 5 or so. So that's definitely a huge problem. And I think if you were to ask any student at the school, they would probably say that's like a top 3 concern, the driving.
Now, we hear about the meetings and the agenda and issues come up. If you're attending a Board of Health meeting and there's an issue and you disagree with something that's being said, what would you do?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'd probably say something.
Okay.
Especially if it had something to do where the perspective was geared more towards adults and it wasn't necessarily taking into account the perspective of kids, because I really think that getting everyone's opinion is so important, no matter age or like where you're from, because it's going to affect everybody no matter what a decision is made. So I think just taking into account the high school students' perspective would be my biggest concern.
So you're comfortable speaking up.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't underestimate your opinion. I can sit here without even knowing you before this and say, I'm sure there's a lot more you know in technology than I know, because you've grown up with it and I've resisted it insofar as I embrace it, but if somebody else can do it for me, then I use my skills for other things. Right, Barry?
Absolutely. I mean, the way we operate on the Board of Health meetings is that when something comes up before us, we have a discussion. And I do my best to make sure that it's one person talking at a time. And I make sure that everyone has an opportunity to say whatever they're thinking. And Erin's included in that. Yes, Erin can't vote. But she can participate in everything else we do and all of the discussions we have, and make a point, especially if it involves something that's a worry for the school-age kids, to make sure that, any we have there is going to actually be involved in the discussion. And so I would hope that Erin and Lauren before her felt particularly comfortable saying what they think. I've learned the hard way that you really have to have that ongoing discussion and consideration of different opinions. And it's almost like it's not really like a debate, but the opinions are shared. Questions arise from the opinions that are suggested, that are made. What I see going wrong in terms of groups is when one person monopolizes the discussion and doesn't give chance for the others to have their say, and where people are just not willing to let people finish what they're saying and instead start talking over the conversation and the statements that are already being made, and people being very divisive and sort of almost insulting, and at times using language that's objectionable. That's my job to control. It's the job of every chairperson on every committee and board in the town.
So, Barry, we're taping this in November 2024, weeks after an election. And there's been a lot of discussion post-election about changes in public health at the federal level. And locally in Plymouth, at times I participate in conversations where there's actually high anxiety among some participants when we talk about vaccines and vaccines for children or measles or fluoride. How do Plymouth residents prepare themselves for dealing with some possible changes, or do they need to?
It's hard for me to say what's going to happen in the immediate future because of the changes going on at the federal level. I do know that we are having discussions like that. I'm having a lot of discussions about that with state public health officials. They're concerned. So, I think the plans are that, we're going to do whatever we can at the state level to make sure that everything is being done properly and to the best of our ability to protect the health of our residents and our visitors.
I actually had some people say to me, I'm going to rush and make sure I get my flu shot, or I'm going to make sure I get my COVID booster. Are these things that people need to be worried about?
I don't think there's ever going to be a ban on getting vaccinations. Basically, it can't be because it would be devastating. Vaccinations probably save hundreds of thousands of lives every year. Yes, some of them can produce some slightly unpleasant side effects, some worse than others. Usually it's a slightly sore arm and an annoyance, but there are people that, have a lot of problems with them. There are medical exemptions. Sometimes people can't actually get the vaccine because of a medical issue. That's understood. Some people have issues with vaccines in general. And they think that, well, it's not going to happen to me, and if it does, I'll just get over it. And that is sometimes the case, but it sometimes isn't. And
So that COVID, right?
Because we've lived through COVID, that we actually set up empty chairs on the lawn of Town Hall, and each chair represented one person from Plymouth who had died of COVID.
Mm-hmm. And how many died altogether?
I think it was probably around 140, 150, something like that. It would have been more, I think, for almost for certain. If we hadn't put in mask regulations when the worst of the pandemic was going on, those lasted for only about maybe 2-3 months, and then we automatically removed them. But it was necessary. The board members felt it was necessary. There was a lot of disagreement among the public about that. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of blowback about that. Mm-hmm. But, the state actually sent citations of commendation to the Board of Health and to myself personally during that time for using science-based reasoning and utilizing that to put common sense precautions into place that, for the most part, people accepted. But there's always a group that just won't. Mm-hmm. And there's not much of anything that anybody can do about that.
Erin, how old are you?
17.
17. So you haven't voted yet?
No.
But you'll be eligible to vote in the next election in 4 years.
Yes.
Actually, in 2 years, when there's a midterm, you can vote. So in this most recent election, there were a number of other health issues that came up, and one of them at times is related to youth insofar as there's concerns about transgenders using bathrooms. And what can you tell us about what's happening in your school with respect to transgender students, if anything?
I really don't think much. I know some students, if they don't necessarily feel comfortable going into a certain bathroom, there are accommodations where they can use the staff bathrooms, which are just single bathrooms, the door locks. They go about their business, but other than that, not much.
Okay. Are there any programs for students that might be dealing with issues that are not, how shall I say, an issue that is followed by the majority of students?
I'd say we have a couple clubs. We have students, a Gay Straight Alliance club, which is always, I think the big thing with South is it's a really good sense of community, and we try to make as many people as we can feel included. With that, not necessarily organizations, but the staff itself, the staff is great. I've formed so many great connections, and I always feel supported and comfortable going to at least a few teachers at the school, and I would hope to say the same for everybody else. But I think the staff has to be the best option for students. Guidance is great. Even just a teacher that someone can confide in.
Good.
Yeah.
Dr. Putford, what do you see as a big issue coming up at future Board of Health or facing the town of Plymouth health-wise?
Well, we have an epidemiologist now working for 6 of the towns, including Plymouth, and Plymouth is the lead community. And she has been doing exhaustive data analysis from available websites from the state and from the federal government about what's going on in individual towns.
And do we need an epidemiologist?
We certainly do.
Okay. Why?
They are basically disease detectives. And when they find out that something is, it's for mostly, but not entirely, for contagious diseases, when they find out there is a cluster of something happening in the town, they are responsible for tracking it and trying to prevent further transmission of the disease. And they are responsible for bringing all the information that they gather to the Board of Health. The latest things that we seem to be finding is a big concern for our town and for other local towns involves things that actually surprised me. But, obviously there is some concern that some of our towns have higher than average cancer rates, and that even younger people are getting cancer at a younger age. That brings us to discussions about what's causing the cancers.
Right.
And so that's things like, you may have heard of PFAS and Roundup and things which are known to be actually causative agents. And that also brings us to my attending all the ND-PAC meetings where we're having discussions about what's going on at the decommissioning of the nuclear power plant and radiation exposures that might be caused by that. There's a lot of things. For instance, if you look at the news, as I do daily, barely a day goes by when I don't see something. Either it's they're worried about, at the state and federal level, about whooping coughs developing in larger than normal numbers, or they're worried about sexually transmitted diseases, which of course is a concern for high school students too. Or they're worried about walking pneumonia, which is something that's also developed into a problem that's growing. So let's put it this way. I have never been bored for even a moment since I became a member of the Board of Health.
Recently, I've actually started receiving COVID updates from a local skilled nursing facility where I happen to have a couple of clients who are residents. So is that something that should not be surprising?
Well, it wouldn't be surprising because I'm sure it's flowing in through our epidemiologist and through there are other people who actually monitor the state reporting system, which is called MAVEN. All of that is reported on a daily basis. And the people who are monitoring that have to acknowledge that they have received the notifications within 24 hours. So we don't mess around with this kind of stuff. This is something that we have to know about. And if there's a cluster of infections or development of diseases going on, we have to immediately investigate the cause and try to identify that so that we can stop it in time.
Aaron, Dr. Plymouth mentioned sexually transmitted diseases. You're 17, you're not 18 yet, but in the recent election, we also heard a lot of discussion about reproductive rights. And I don't know whether or not you feel that you or your fellow students are too young to be concerned about that, but I'm going to ask you, do you have any kind of thoughts about that issue for yourself or for other students?
Well, I think as a generation, we should care. I don't think as many students realize as they should that this isn't just a now issue. It's an issue that can continue on into our adulthood. It's something that's going to affect us. I think some people have opinions. They have their own thoughts on what should happen and what shouldn't happen. But regardless, I feel as though a lot of students, either they don't really know what they're talking about, or they don't understand the issue and therefore they don't care. So I think just educating students and showing them that this isn't just their childhood that it might affect and it's not really going to impact them, but it will impact them in the future. I think that's something the school could focus on more.
Okay.
For sure.
So Dr. Potford, again, if people had health concerns and they wanted to reach the Office of Public Health, would the best thing be to call Town Hall or to email?
Probably email. The reason I say that is that, like most departments of public health across the state, and there's a lot of them, it's not just one. There's either boards of health or departments of public health or both, as exists here in Plymouth. They are understaffed. So Karen is the director. She has one health agent, Margaret Coe. She has one inspector who mostly works on septic inspections, which has to be done, and one administrative assistant that works in the office. And that's it. This is a town of, 62,000 people?
More in the summer, and those, we have voters, but yes. Yeah.
And so, it restricts what Karen can accomplish. We have people coming in and saying, well, why don't you monitor to make sure people are throwing recyclings away properly and not putting it into the trash flow. And the response, of course, is, how are we supposed to monitor that? We can't take somebody out of the office and have them go around all over the town looking at people's trash and recycling. It's impossible. So what happens in the department is that there is usually an inspector sent out whenever there is a complaint, which is confirmed. And that's pretty much what Karen can do. I mean, she's got a budget, which is difficult to increase, of course, because the town has a lot of fiscal responsibilities and concerns. And it's not just here. Public health has been chronically in this state underfunded and understaffed. And that's why they put that grant program in place.
Sure.
So now we can share people between a variety of different towns is exactly what we are currently doing.
And what I hear from Aaron, and really from you as well, is education when it relates to the youth. Will your board be at all involved in trying to initiate or promote any education at the school level?
Well, you're asking somebody who worked for 36 years as a college professor. And so the answer to that is yes, and I have already made offers to the schools that if they wanted us to, any member of the Board of Health, I'm sure would be perfectly happy and willing and excited to come into the schools and to offer, whatever information they could, or to conduct discussions with the students about anything that pertains to public health.
Good. So, Dr. Potvin, when you're not busy with the Board of Health and things related to that, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, spare time is limited. Obviously, growing up in Massachusetts, I'm a bit of a Boston sports fan. And having spent 36 years living in the New York area, it was kind of awkward. But, I do like to watch some of the sports events. I do that. I read a lot. I'm a fan of, the Science Channel.
Okay.
So I watch things all the time about how the universe works. Just because I'm inherently curious. I can't help myself.
Yeah.
I sort of ascribe that mostly to what I learned and experienced when I was an undergraduate student at Brandeis, where they actually encourage that. They encourage community involvement more than a lot of colleges do. But, that was back long ago when things were different than they are now. Beyond that, I'm a certified scuba diver. I've done underwater photography.
Good.
I enjoy cross-country skiing. So I'm definitely a snow lover.
Yeah.
Which is another, I thought I was going to see a lot more snow when we moved to Massachusetts, but we haven't.
Where do you do your cross-country skiing?
Generally up in Jackson, New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. Very nice.
And so, my wife is not that enthused over that, but there's pluses because she can also shop and enjoy some time away and some bed and breakfast experiences.
Yeah, good. Wonderful. Erin, you told us a little bit in the beginning about your activities, but when you're not attending Board of Health meetings or busy at Plymouth South, what do you like to, and not working, what do you do in your spare time?
Well, especially since I'm going to be leaving for school in a year, I really am trying to soak up all the time I can with my friends and family.
Okay.
Love going to the beach whenever I can.
What beach?
My favorite right now is probably Scusset.
Very lovely, yeah.
But the summer, I love Long Beach. It's a great hangout spot, especially sunset, and you have Sandy's right there. It's great. Love spending time with my dog.
And what dog do you have?
Cavalier King Charles Spaniel.
Nice.
Like I said, I'm in orchestra. I love, whenever I can, I love to travel.
Now, in orchestra, do you perform?
Yes.
And where do you perform?
Usually at school for concerts. We sometimes do community stuff with Trium. We used to go to nursing homes. It's been kind of difficult the past couple of years trying to get kids vaccinated with COVID to go to the hospitals. But community stuff. Usually once a year we have a fundraising concert at Memorial Hall. And then just local stuff. But this time next week, actually, the band and orchestra from both high schools are going to be going to Honolulu for the Pearl Harbor ceremony.
Wow. You'll be going?
Yes.
Very exciting. Pack your sunscreen.
Yes.
How long will you be there?
5 days. We leave the 4th and come back the 9th.
Have you ever been there before?
I have not.
Wonderful. Are you looking forward to it?
Yes. Very much.
Very good. Dr. Potvin, as we finish this segment today, again, we want to thank you for all that you do and for all that you contribute to the town. Now, if people joined us halfway through and they didn't see everything, if you had in a sentence or a short paragraph one thing that you want to leave with our viewers, what would that be?
I think it would probably be the Board of Health is consisting of 5 extremely dedicated, knowledgeable individuals whose primary goal is to protect the health and lives of the people of the town of Plymouth. Sometimes we have to do things which are not terribly popular, but most of the time we can find middle ground, and we will continue to do that as long as we are allowed to, as long as we're members, appointed by the Select Board.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Barry Potvin, Chair of the Plymouth Board of Health. Aaron Hayes, same question to you. What if somebody just joined us a little while ago? What would you want them to know and remember about you and about today?
In terms of public health, I think the biggest thing I'd say is be educated, know your stuff. Especially as a high school student, that's what I notice is usually the biggest hinder with a lot of kids, is just not knowing what is really going on and what is happening. So definitely be educated. Yeah. Thank
Aaron
you.
Hayes, Plymouth South student and member of the Plymouth Board of Health. As a student representative, thank you for being here. Thank you. And this completes this edition of Plymouth Profiles. I'd like to thank everybody here, Dr. Barry Potvin, Aaron Hayes, our student representative to the Board of Health, people in the studio here supporting us, Tom Bowles, Ben Alexander, and again, and Melissa Matinzi, and the entire staff here from Local Scene. Please join us for future presentations. I'm Steve Triffletti. Good day.